Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Matt Long with your EZAG podcast for Tuesday, June the 9th, the number one source of information to help you farm differently. I'm here today and I want to visit with you about maximizing your yield potential in the field, or holding on to the maximum yield potential that you've already established. And so first, I want to follow up on last week's talk about irrigation and limiting the impact of sidewall compaction on the root zone. And then I'm going to go into evaluating early season bushels per thousand plants in your field and what management decisions you might make to keep all the bushels per thousand plants you have out there. So back here, I've made a couple drawings. This one here is of a root system that was impacted by sidewall compaction versus a root system that was not. And so we can see this root system branches out a lot further because it was not impacted by that sidewall compaction, whereas this root system, those roots, as they came out, those nodal roots really go straight down. And so for an example, I'll show you this plant here, and this plant has pretty good root structure all the way around. And so this is going to end up being a plant that looks like this, because we've got that root system that goes out and down and branches and comes in contact with more of the soil. And a couple reasons it's important to have that well-established root system is, one, most of the nutrients that the corn plant uses are going to be taken up by root interception, meaning that one of the fine root hairs on this actually has to come in contact with that phosphorus or that iron that's out there in the soil that it needs for plant nutrition. So another reason is, as that root system grows out, you're going to have a lot larger pool with this root system to gain moisture from versus this root system. If all of these corn roots were impacted by sidewall compaction, this is what you'd see if you looked at that plant. Okay? And the problem with that is you've taken what already is 63%, or about 63% of the root mass of the corn plant is within 7 inches of the stalk, and you've compressed that down and made it a much higher percentage. And when you take a higher percentage of the roots and put them in a smaller area of the soil, you have less chance for root interception of moisture and nutrients. So now let's talk real quick about making an early season evaluation of your yield. So these three plants here all came out of the same area, the same field. We're going to look at them. They all have pretty well developed root systems, and they all are basically the same size. If we hold them up there together, I mean, they're the same size plant. So these plants all sprouted at relatively the same time. And so if we look at a field like that that's really uniform, we're going to give it a high rating on our bushels per thousand plant scale. For an irrigated population, which this field was, we're probably going to give this a rating of about 8, maybe 8.5. I would say irrigated populations typically top out around 9 or 9.5 bushels per thousand plants. So if we have a 26,000 plant population and it tops out at 9, you would get 244 bushel yield. So an 8.5, we're going to say this field probably has the potential of making about 231 bushel. If we have a field that has, some big plants in it and some small plants in it, we're going to have to take and reevaluate that bushel per thousand plants yield. So if we have a significant number, say 30% of the plants out there in the field that are probably 1.5 to 2 leaves behind in growth stage, we're gonna really pull back that yield potential of that field, because these plants are going to shadow out a lot of the small ones. These plants are going to be stressed. They're going to grow a spindly root system and a spindly stalk, and they're not going to produce as large of an ear as this plant. And so when we look at that, if we have an irrigated population when the plants are close together, we're probably going to say this field has somewhere between 5 and 6 bushel of yield potential per 1,000 plants. If it's a dryland population where these have a little more room, we might say this field has 6 to 7 bushel per 1,000 plants population, because the impact of this plant on this one is going to be less when we're in a dryland situation. The last thing I want to visit with you about today is how to properly growth stage your corn in order to make decisions, management for herbicide applications, fungicide applications, and foliar fertilizer applications if that's in your plan. So when the corn first emerges from the soil, it has a seed leaf called the coleoptile on it. And on this plant right here, you see this little tiny bit of plant material that's left. This was the coleoptile. After that, you have the first true leaf, and the first true leaf has a rounded tip. So you know how that tip is rounded versus this tip being more pointed, okay? So this leaf collar here with the rounded tip leaf, this is called V1. And then we go to growth stage V2 and growth stage V3. And if we look in this whorl, we don't quite have the fourth collar of this corn plant out of the ground yet. And so this corn would be V3. So the thing that's important to understand there is from about the V4 growth stage up to V7 or 8 is when this corn plant will be determining the maximum number of kernel rows on its ear. And we don't want to do anything to negatively impact that. If anything, application of a fungicide or a foliar feed treatment in that time frame most likely maximizes yield. The other thing that is important in this is to understand how we determine whether herbicides can be applied or not. A herbicide like stare down is labeled to and through the 5th leaf collar. And so we've got 1, 2, 3 today. If this was the 5th leaf collar, but the 6th one had not yet emerged, you would still be within label on your stare down. But if the 6th leaf collar is emerged, if it's fully visible right here, on the stalk, then you are beyond the ability to use stare down. The other herbicide that I can think of off the top of my head that has a label for growth stage of your corn is atrazine. I know a lot of us probably bend that rule often, but atrazine is labeled to 12 inches. And so the way that is measured is from the soil surface, and we're going to act like my finger is the soil surface here, up to the apex of the leaf that actually curves down. So the 4th leaf here is the one that's curving down. It's not sticking straight up. We may actually go to the 3rd leaf, because I think if that one wasn't broke over, it would be still up. So if we go to the 3rd leaf, we look at that, we're at about 6 inches tall. If we looked at it on this 4th leaf where it's broke over, that corn is considered about 8 inches tall. And the label on atrazine is up to 12 inches in height. And so that would catch any mix that you have that has atrazine in it, as well as Acuron, Lumax, and several other products. So just wanted to touch base with you today on a few things that impact our final yield. And those are also things that if I have an appointment with you over the next week or so to go to the field, we're likely going to look at. We're going to evaluate your bushels per 1,000. We're going to make management decisions to protect the crop's yield. And we're going to visit a little bit, especially if you're an AgriEdge grower with LandDB, we'll visit a little bit about starting your 2021 crop plan. That's all for today. I'm Matt Long, helping you farm differently, providing information you can't get anywhere else.